how did you do that kind of risk analysis, or kind of like, how did you weigh out the pros and cons and then decide, okay, I'm just, I'm making the switch? How did you, what is your technique? What's your tactic? What advice would you give women when they're coming up to a really kind of pivotal decision like that?
I was very unhappy. I think that was one of the things. I had been an academic. I'd been teaching at a university that was really well run, and I left that university for a university that was much less well run. And so I knew that I'd gone from working conditions that were tolerable to working conditions that were intolerable. And I knew there were things about the job that I wasn't happy about. But when I'd been working at a university that had a strong infrastructure to support faculty, it allowed me to have an easier time of it. So wasn't completely content. So I would say that shift, that understanding that even in the best of circumstances, doing that job, I wasn't happy. And then I went to what for me were the worst of circumstances. So I realized how bad it could get. And there's something about that change. I think that you can be what I call low grade miserable for your entire life.
Yes.
But you can't hold despair. Right? That's just not a way to live. So that was one thing that was very helpful. So I knew at that point that I had to change my life because I couldn't live with that unhappiness. And so I was faced with this idea of, well, do I go back on the academic job market and get another academic job? Or do I make a different change? And I thought about what I had done. I had tried public universities, private universities, universities in different geographies. I had tried different departments in different universities. And so I knew that it wasn't the department, it wasn't the type of university, it wasn't the location of the job that was really causing my dissatisfaction. It was something else. So, and I would say, if anything, I knew before that I was unhappy, but I kept listening to other people. And so I'd say you have to find that place in yourself because no one is going to understand what drives you and what makes you content. We can certainly talk to our mentors and our coaches and get advice, but it has to sit well with you. And I stayed longer than I would have because of all of the people telling me, oh, you should stay, just try harder. So I would say that's the first thing, is to listen to what's important to you. And the way that I found that voice for myself was I thought about the person that I was when I was 16. And that girl thought she could do anything. And I realized that I was not living in a way that would have made me a good role model for her. I was living in a way that my 16-year-old self would not have respected. And I actually thought, well, that's pretty terrible because that was a great kid and she deserves role models that look like her. And you know what? The next generation of great young people deserve role models that look like them. And you can't be a good role model if you're deeply unhappy and unsatisfied with the work you're doing. So you've got to think about, how do you live up to be someone that your younger self could respect? And for me, that was very compelling. And I still check in with that sense of that person that I was, who really believed, and I was really fortunate growing up with a family that taught me I could do anything. And so if you had this foundation where you could do anything and you're doing something that makes you unhappy, well, that's not success.
How did you get clarity on what your strengths, your competencies, and being able to align it to your purpose in a sense, and really then be able to tell your story to these, these corporations in terms of making that transition? How did you go about doing that?
Yeah, that was actually really hard because I didn't know how to tell my story initially, because I, as an academic, I didn't actually understand what was going to be compelling to corporate entities. And so I had to learn. So I did a number of things. One, I started to learn, well, what is this business world? I didn't even think of like a corporation. I was like, business. I want to work in business. What is a business? And a friend had said to me once, if you want to understand how business people think, you should read the newspaper that business people read. So I got a subscription to the Wall Street Journal, began to read it, and just cover every day. That was my practice, just to understand what is this, right? Like, what's profit and loss, and what do they care about? So that was one. And then I also reached out to friends and peers who I knew had gone to business school or were working in some of these mysterious business places.
Right.
And I said, look, I need help. I don't know what I want to do. And I believed at that point that my rubric for deciding what to do was broken, because I had used the rubric that I had, do what you love. It had left me unhappy. I didn't know what to do. So I began to think about what do I think would possibly solve some of the problems that I have. And so one, I knew that I had no control over my geography. So I wanted to go into a field where I could get a new job and not have to move. That was one
Right.
thing. Very simple, right?
Yeah.
I also knew that I worked in a way that was incredibly hierarchical when I was working with students, solitary when I was doing research. And I wanted to work in a collaborative, less hierarchical way. So I knew that. I knew that I really loved to travel. And there was this mysterious business travel thing that I was really interested in. And so I was like, I wanted travel to be a part of what I did. I also knew that as a professor, I was really good in front of an audience, because that's what I had been doing.
Right.
And so I wanted to find something that would leverage some of the skills that I already had. I didn't want to have to start completely at the bottom and buy someone coffee. Like that's sort of what I said. And I deliberately, I can make coffee now, but I didn't learn how to make coffee till I was much older. And so I knew these things. And then I talked to my friends in business and I said, these are the things that I know. Can you help me? And I had a couple friends who said, well, these are the types of jobs where people do some of the things that you want. They have to do these other things that you might not know about. But that's really what I did. And then one of the most important support pieces that I got from a friend was I had an academic CV, which is 6 to 8 pages. Right. And he took my academic CV and he helped me translate it into a language that people in a corporate entity, people in business would actually understand. So you look at things like, okay, I had run research projects with research assistants. He was like, you manage small teams. He was like, and he said, and and I had applied for grants, and then I had to manage grants, and he was like, ran small P&Ls, right? Like, so all of these, because I didn't know that language. And so he helped me by having those conversations say, okay, I understand a little bit about what you want. There's a lot of things that fill that. So good, you're not being too picky, because you can't be that picky at this point. And here are how your skills translate into something that makes sense, or will make sense to a recruiter or a manager who's going to read your CV.
How did you, did you have any fears, limiting beliefs, kind of imposter syndrome? And if so, how did you overcome them or get past them?
So one of the things, and I mentioned this before, is I grew up with my grandparents, and they inspired in me this idea that you can do anything, but it takes hard work. And so when I was a child and I would get frustrated or something was hard, they would always reframe it if I didn't do it. And they would say, well, did you put in the work? Have you done the work? And so what I realized is that anything I wanted to do, it's about how much work are you going to put in. You put in the hours and the work and you learn, right? And you think about, that's how I approach everything, which is, I might not know how to do it, but I can learn it. The question is not, can I do it? But am I willing to put in the work that it takes to actually be good at this thing? And sometimes the answer to that is no. But if it's always about the work, then it's not about you. And then even if you do the work and you fail the first time, the answer is, well, let's put in more work. Right. And so that's how I looked at the change, which is I have a lot to learn. I have to put in the work. And that has served me really well. And when you have, as we all do, we do things that just don't work out, or you have a project and you miss something. I look at it and I say, okay, where did I not put in the work, or where did I do the wrong work? What have I learned? So the next time I can do the right work to be successful. So that has really helped me, is that consistently reframing something in terms of not doubting whether or not I can do it, but always understanding that it's, am I willing to do all the work? Sometimes it's more work than we want to do, and that's fair. But if we want to be successful at something, we've got to put in the work.
And what are some of the habits that you practice in order to be successful?
It's, the habits that I practice are, I think part of it is some of the mental health care that I do. And what I try to do is to do something physical every day. And usually it's walking or running. And the reason why I like walking or running is because it's very meditative. And so if I do it at the start of the day, it allows me to think through what I want to do with the day, right? And to sometimes work out difficult problems. If I do it at the end of the day, it allows me to separate from what's been going on, especially if there's something that I've really been struggling with, then that kind of physical separation. And I've taught myself that physical activity, it's meditative, but it's also deep thinking. And so that really helps me a lot. Some of that's my ideation time. One of the I think challenges is the more senior you get, the less maker time you get, and the more manager time you have to spend. And so, our manager time are those half-hour blocks where we're talking to other people. It's really hard to dig into hard projects and think about the strategy or the even execution of complex projects when you just don't get those significant blocks of time to think them through. And so what I find is that if I can get a run or a walk in, it allows me to have some of that maker time that's very free flowing that helps inform the work that I'm going to do. So I think that's a really essential. It's been difficult recently because I'm in California and we couldn't go outside for a few days. But as soon as I woke up this morning and the air was clear again, first thing I did is run. I also get up really early. And I would get up early even if I didn't have to, even if I don't have meetings, because I know that I'm clearest in the morning. The other thing that I think is really important is I try to do the awful task first. So the thing that I'm dreading, the thing that I'm like, oh, I do that. Because that's where you need to be most fresh. That's where you probably you want to cut corners because you don't enjoy it. And so do the awful task first, and then the tasks that are easier, they become almost a reward.
What has helped you gain access to influential leaders and build a strong network or community around yourself?
It varies depending on the culture of an organization. I think the first thing when you join an organization is to listen much more than you talk. To try to understand the lay of the land, to try to understand whose agendas are at play, and that I think is one step. And then to think about, if you're thinking about building a relationship over the long term, you really want initially to show your value. And sometimes the way that we want to show our value is we do a lot. We're like, look, I'm valuable. But what we've got to understand is that relationships are reciprocal, and that you also need other people need to or want to show you their value. And so that opportunity to listen is to essentially get some of that, to understand the value of others, and not from a like, oh, we only care about people for the value, but we all want to, I think, contribute to our organizations. And so understanding that it's reciprocal. And so you look for opportunities to show your value, but you also look for opportunities to provide others, to highlight others' value or to show their value. I think those are really important. And then I've had a lot of success in connecting with peers. And often I just ask, what's it like here? Who should I talk to? What types of people are successful here? And that's, again, people will give you that advice, and they want to give you that advice, because when you join an organization, everybody wants you to be successful. You're in recruiting, the costs of bad hire. No one wants that. And so if you take that time to listen and to get that advice, and then to meet as many people as possible, it's really, it's important. It's one of the reasons why for my job I traveled a lot. Now it's, I think one of my fundamental assumptions before COVID was that go sit down with someone, be in the same room, break bread, be a human in the same room, and as much as you can get that face time in a distributed organization, because that's what is going to take you through long term. it's interesting now that we can't do that.
Right.
I haven't traveled for work in 6 months.
Right.
And so those meetings that we would normally have, those sidebar conversations, they're much harder to have. So you have to work harder to check in on people,
Mm-hmm.
ask them about their work,
Mm-hmm.
ask them, is there something I can do that would,
Mm-hmm.
that you've wanted, that you've needed, right? And
Right.
so that's generally been how I've learned about the organization and
Mm-hmm.
learned about what other people need in the organization.
What are the biggest opportunities that you see for women of color, people of color, that as a result of kind of this forced conversation now, in a sense of, being able to elevate their voice? What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think there's an opportunity for, as you said, the elevation of the voice. And what we see is leaders are listening in a way
Mm-hmm.
that perhaps they didn't listen before. And they are open to a different type of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that there seems to be an opening for greater communication across difference. There
Mm-hmm.
seems to be an opening for more empathy. And then
Mm-hmm.
what we're hearing, or what we've heard from our employees, is they want more. And so they want to know what we are doing to develop our employees
Mm-hmm.
from underrepresented groups, and not just employees from underrepresented groups. We have, all of our employees saying, no, we have to not only contribute to these external organizations, but
Right.
we've really got to take a look at what's happening on our teams. Why aren't we getting more diversity in our pipeline? Why aren't we seeing more diversity in leadership? So I think that it is an opportunity to really have that conversation for people willing to say something, we have to do something differently,
Mm-hmm.
because this is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that was not the kind of frank and honest conversation that we were having a year ago.
What advice would you give women, in this kind of current digital age and this environment where things keep changing and shifting? What advice would you give them to that would help them accelerate their success and stay, like you said, either keep the the car on the rails, keep it on the track, or getting ahead of the curve a bit?
So I think one of the things that we see among women is this idea that the work is enough. And the
Mm-hmm.
work is really important, but you also have to make sure your work is visible. And the more senior you get, the more your job shifts to making your work visible and then making the work of your team visible. And
Mm.
especially in this type of moment, you have to make your work visible. And if it's not visible, it's that tree falling in the forest and anyone here. That's what
Right.
happens to work. And I've seen so many men who will spend the time talking to managers and everyone about how great they are and sending out the email about like this great success that they've had, and
Mm-hmm.
having the meeting to be like, here's this great thing that I did. And women are shaking their heads going, but what about me? And it's like, you've got to understand that part of the job is talking about the work.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's uncomfortable for you to talk about yourself and the work that you did, a mind hack that you can do is to think about you're talking about your best friend. Because for most of
Mm-hmm.
us, if we have a best friend, we can tell you everything she's done. We are the best champion in the world. No one is better than that best friend. So
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about your own work, talk about your work like you're your own best friend.